Hello. So, in keeping with my theme of human communications, which is something I've discussed in a number of videos now, I want to talk about loneliness. I'm sure I've covered it before. A lot of these subjects I will have covered before at some point. But in hindsight, repeating videos maybe isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, repeating video subjects, because sometimes I can maybe offer or reflect on a new angle which I didn't cover in the previous video. So this is a completely spontaneous video, and I want to talk about the nature of loneliness. Now, loneliness is something that I've experienced all too often in my life, and it's not necessarily a case that I don't have friends. I do, um, and I would say, as a general concept, I get on well with people. I consider myself quite a social sort of guy. I don't know what sort of message these videos send out about me, but I know in my real life I have friends. I'm a social guy. I get on well with people as a general thing. But nevertheless, loneliness is something I have experienced all too often. And I think loneliness can be subcategorized several ways. You can get loneliness from a lack of romantic attachment, i.e., lack of a girlfriend, lack of a boyfriend. I think that is a very basic focus point of loneliness. But having said that, I think people can be lonely when they're in a relationship or in a marriage. And I don't want to make this video too much about the subject of marriage, but I'm just making the point that you can get lonely situations where ostensibly someone is in a relationship. So ostensibly someone else is in their life, but doesn't mean that they necessarily have someone to talk to. Um, they could be in a situation where they don't understand the partner doesn't understand them, so they may as well be completely alone. One thing I always find exacerbates loneliness is travel. Um, sitting in my room here, I'm alone. It's late at night. Other members of my family are asleep. So, although the subject's on my mind, I'm relatively okay right now. I could talk to friends on the other side of the world on the internet. But when I travel, I find that exacerbates the sensation of loneliness in a way I find very unpleasant. Some people have a very independent spirit; they can travel with no problem. Um, with me, it's not that I have an anxiety about traveling. I can look after myself insofar as, safety is concerned. I have no major issues with that. Sometimes I have language barriers and so on and so forth, which are issues that a lot of travelers experience. But the biggest challenge for me, actually, and my biggest anxiety with travel, if I have any, is actually solitude. I don't like it. Partly because I want to take in an experience with another person, but also because there's something about travel, particularly, that exacerbates that feeling. If you're on your own and especially if you're in a romantic city, I've been in Paris and Rome, two of the most romantic cities in the world. Both occasions I was alone. So I know firsthand how this feels. When I was in China, surprisingly enough, it was less of an issue because I usually met people in every city that I went to. I had contacts everywhere where I went. But when I've travelled around Europe, the experience has often been soured by that sensation of loneliness. And I'm saying this not to sort of get attention or get people to feel sorry for me, because right now I'm feeling okay, but rather to just reflect on something I think a lot of people can relate to. There's something about that particular travel that, like I said, it's not everyone. Some people really, really don't mind their solitude, but personally, I find it a challenge. I can just about handle going on a day trip, but anything longer than a day, I start to get a little bit, well, it brings me down, and it does overshadow the experience. Um, of course, there's benefits to solitude because you can go through your own itinerary, do exactly what you want without having to always think about, well, what do they want to do? We'll see this museum. They might want to see that museum. They might not want to see a museum, whatever. So there is some benefits to solitude, but loneliness is something I've experienced far more than I would have liked to in my life. I'll give another example. 11 years ago now, I was at the Live 8 concert in London. Big charity concert organised by Bob Geldof and other celebrities to not raise money for Africa, but raise awareness of the Make Poverty History campaign. Some of the biggest concerts ever. Huge concerts. I was in a crowd of 250,000 people in Hyde Park, which is more people than the entire city of Sunderland. I'm talking about the administration, I'm talking about the city proper, in one park, completely surrounded by a sea of humanity. And yet, being there on my own, being at this historic event, I started to get that sensation of loneliness. So, some of the situations where you could feel most lonely are actually crowded situations. I remember that night I had missed my train back to the northeast. All the hostels were fully booked. I basically slept rough for a night. It was a very long night, believe me. At that time, there was a few issues going on with violence against homeless people in London, so I was frankly scared of falling asleep in case something happened to me. Um, it's a night I'll never forget. But I remember I was literally walking around for miles around central London trying to find some sort of hostel that might be open. Now I was going around Bayswater and Knightsbridge areas like that. And as I got further away from the city centre, it got quieter and quieter. And I remember at one point thinking, this is a vain effort. So I'm going to turn back. And I want to go to Trafalgar Square, not because I think I'll find anything, but I simply want to be around humanity, even if they're total strangers. So my sensations of loneliness that day alternated from loneliness in the crowd to then a few hours later wanting to be in the crowd, even though I knew I wouldn't know anyone. I do remember though going into a pub and speaking to a World War II veteran. At least that's what he said. But I had no reason to doubt him. He was certainly the right age, and he told me certain horror stories about what he'd seen in the Dutch East Indies. Um, so it's a night I'll never forget. That incidentally was the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II. Um, so this feeling of loneliness is something that is embedded in human psyche. I think there's only a very small handful of people can honestly say they would never ever feel alone. It could be loneliness from a situation whereby you're isolated from your views. That can be a lonely feeling. If you're standing up against the consensus and you have a different point of view, it can feel lonely. Um, there is a lot of scenarios where people can feel lonely. I have also been in situations where I have been part of a bigger group and we've went on some sort of day trip or something, and I've got cut off from the main group. That's not necessarily a case of like I'm a child, I'm getting lost. It's more a case of this is a bit shit. I came with the group. I want to be with the group. I remember spending about 1 hour going around. It was actually a bonfire night in the market town of Hexham, and I got cut off from my main group. And actually, on that particular occasion, it was a problem because I needed to be with them to get the coach back. And it was a huge crowd, so one thing happened, and we got. But I remember seeing people in that group, and that feeling of relief, even though the people I saw weren't friends, they were just people I recognized from the group, was a great feeling. Now, some people might say that to have that sort of sensation is needy and almost even weak. I disagree with that. I think that a communal spirit is something that is deeply ingrained in the human psyche. And like I said, it's not everyone. Some people are genuinely good at solitude, but I think most people at some point want human company. And it doesn't even have to necessarily be friends or a partner, just human company. I mean, that's why people very often start conversations, at least in this country, with total strangers on a long journey because it's a shared experience. You know, when I went to London last time, I made small talk with my fellow passengers. You know, I'll never see them again, but that isn't the point. The point is it's a shared experience. The point is if you're sitting opposite people for 4 hours, you're going to say something. And this perhaps is universal. The same thing happened in China. Now, it wasn't necessarily a case of conversation because my Chinese is limited, but I remember a grandmother and her granddaughter, and I was sharing laughter with the antics of the little girl. So this sort of thing, it's very, very down to earth. It's not complex. It's just something that is very, very basic about human communications. Um, I think in some ways it could be easier to live in a mountain cabin in the Canadian wilderness, or the American wilderness for that matter, than it is to be alone in a big city. That's because in the wilderness, obviously life is tough, but the basis is solitude to begin with. Whereas loneliness in a big city, when you're surrounded by thousands or millions of people, I think can be terrible. It can be a very, very soul destroying feeling because you're looking around and everyone else is either in couples or they're with their friends or whatever the case may be. Now I find that human beings can also be quite cruel about this because there is an attitude, oh well, they're a loner, it must be their own fault. The truth is, some people bring it on themselves because they have an unpleasant personality and they don't try to be friendly to others. But there are other people who may have a perfectly decent personality, but they might be a bit introvert, might be a bit shy. So there's a lot of reasons why people can be in this situation. Personally, I've always been the sort of person if I'm in a big group and I notice that someone is maybe looking a little bit on their own, I find I would go out of my way to talk to that person because I want to be a decent human being and consider, well, they look a bit alone. I'll just go and chat to them a bit. It's not a case that I want to become great friends with them. It's a case of empathy because I've been in similar situations. But I also think there is a lesson from all of this, or at least something that we need to develop in ourselves. We need to develop not emotionally relying on other people. And this very much ties to the video I made about not caring what others think. We have to get to a point where we're comfortable in our own skin and we keep our mind busy and we keep physically busy as well. It doesn't mean that you can ever really purge something like loneliness, but I think there is ways to make it more manageable. So I'll round this up. Let me know your thoughts on loneliness. And by the way, this is not particularly about me right now. I get the feeling occasionally, but at this exact moment, I'm sort of like, a little like it would be nice to have company, but it's like 4 a.m. And yeah, sometimes I just want to talk to someone, and I start conversations with friends just wanting to chat. But I don't consider myself a particularly needy person. Certainly not as much as I may have been before. So let me know your thoughts, and thanks for watching.